Guys, and welcome to 10 things you should know about a crested gecko. Recently I got a new pet, a blue-tongued skink, and whilst doing research on them I found these kind of videos very interesting. Obviously I've owned reptiles for about 17 years now, and I have leopard geckos, crested gecko, chihuahua, pink-tongued skink, now a blue-tongued skink. I've had jumping spiders, giant African land snails, so I don't know which ones you want to see next, but I can go through 5 or 10 things you should know before getting in this case, crested gecko. Oftentimes people opt for a crested gecko because they hear that they don't need heating or to eat bugs, or they don't need a particularly big tank. But one thing I do want to highlight in this video is, although there are minimum requirements and things you can do that they will technically be fine with, I think we should always strive to do the best we can do for our animals. So keep that in mind as I go through these points. So number 1, they can greatly benefit from feeder insects. Now of course you can get diets that include insect protein, so technically they are still getting insect into their diet because in the wild they would eat insects as well as fermenting fruit and berries and everything. So you may see diets like Pangea, Rapashi, Sticky Foot Gold, lots of different ones in the markets, and technically yes, you could have a crested gecko raised on these diets their entire life and they'll probably be okay. However, if we want to strive to give them the very best life, we want to increase their mental and physical enrichment, giving them live feeders can greatly benefit them. Now it is important that the feeders aren't left in there too long, also that the feeders aren't too big, but crickets in particular are Lyra's favourite and she will literally leap across the tank to get them. Now some people may say they've tried insects and their gecko won't eat them. Now I will say it does go season to season with Lyra. Sometimes she has no interest, other times she'll try to take your hand off for one. So there is that. But another reason your animal might not be interested in insects, and this leads me on to the second point, is they might not be heated enough. They don't need very hot temperatures. Actually, they can die if it gets too hot, like anything really, but they're particularly sensitive. However, particularly in winter, they can really benefit from a heater. Now, whether that's a ceramic heat emitter or a deep heat projector, I would go for the... As I was saying, I would go for the deep heat projector. Just personally, I feel that really energizes them. What I wouldn't recommend is a heat mat on the side of the tank, because that's pointless. None of the tank is getting heat apart from that one boiling hot wall. So don't do that, but a deep heat projector, ceramic heat emitter with the appropriate like dimming thermostat so it doesn't get too hot can be amazing. And you'll see this animal that wasn't really eating, wasn't really active, suddenly alive and well. Now when it comes to summer, they probably won't need that heater, and if you've got it on a thermostat, the thermostat will probably turn it off. But particularly if you live in cold areas, you're going to probably want to add a little bit of heat. The next point, as you've probably seen, is they're actually really fun to handle. They're very docile. I've never been bitten by Lyra in even a defensive way. Maybe when I've been hand feeding her a cricket, maybe she's caught my hand. I'm not sure. You can't feel their teeth. Like, they're just fun to handle. They can be delicate compared to other reptiles, I guess, but very easy to handle, very active. They're constantly on the move. Sometimes you can feel their back legs when they're about to jump. Here we go, like there. So definitely if you want a pet that doesn't mind being handled, doesn't mind coming out, a crested gecko is a great option. For little kids, I would just keep in mind that something can happen, and that leads me to the next point. They can drop their tails. Now sometimes this happens for no apparent reason. A lot of crested geckos in the wild don't actually have their tails anymore. So the fact that Lyra is 7 or 8 years old now and she hasn't lost her tail, I really appreciate. This can happen if anyone grabs her tail or handles her roughly or she's scared. But as I said, sometimes geckos just drop them in the night. Number 5, they need to be misted down once or twice a day, depending on where you live and the kind of season you're in. For example, autumn, winter, I can usually spray them down once a day, big spray in the evening. In summer I will do twice a day. If you live somewhere particularly dry, you might want to do that a little more often. You have to make sure the tank does dry between misting so it's not completely soaked like you see a lot of frog tanks, but they do require high humidity. Now, a way you can achieve this as well is having deep substrate. When I got my first Crested Gecko, I used paper towel for the first few days and I realised it was no good. She actually lost her stickiness in her feet because it wasn't humid enough. As soon as I switched to a loose substrate and there was humidity, that all came back. Not only that, but humidity, the high humidity will help them. With shedding, I never see stuck shed on Lyra, so obviously the humidity is right. You can also use foggers and sprayers. Obviously when we're misting, that isn't just for humidity, that's also for keeping our animals hydrated. And for the longest time, people have said that Crested Geckos don't drink from standing water and that you need to mist them because they will drink droplets, which is true. However, in the last few weeks, I have decided to add a water dish in with Lyra just as a secondary precaution because now she doesn't have glass sides to her tank. There's not these big glass surfaces where the water just stays on. I have to rely on the plants having the droplets on for long enough that she can actually get fully hydrated. So I did decide to put a water dish in here just so if she does need the water, it's there. That will also help with humidity. And as long as you don't have a tiny baby who could potentially drown in a water bowl, then I think this could be a good idea to include something like this in your Crested Gecko's tank. Number 6, these guys benefit a lot from bioactive tanks. Now obviously it can be quite daunting doing that. If you want to start off with something more naturalistic, maybe just one potted plant with a growth light and see how that goes. Obviously you want the substrate that the plant's planted in to be reptile safe, so it might be worth buying a plant from a reptile shop. But they hugely benefit from it, and a great thing about that is you get a really nice tank to look at. It's constantly growing and changing, which makes it super interesting for these guys, and yeah, it's really fun to maintain. Another thing, if you do use a bioactive tank, obviously I encourage you to still keep things clean and don't just rely solely on your cleanup crew, but I never have to clean out poop for her. The isopods eat it so quickly, it just disappears. Number 7, and this might be obvious, but they do not have eyelids. This is quite common in geckos, but I do have leopard geckos who do have eyelids, so I figured I'd point that out. The way you want to tell that they are actually asleep is their lashes will be tucked just downwards. So obviously she's awake now and they're quite stuck up. But when she's asleep, they do tilt down. Number 8, you're not going to get much activity out of them during the day. They are crepuscular, so they're going to be sleeping pretty much all day and you want to leave them like that. Lyra's favourite spots are in her snake plant and her coconut hide. So generally if you want an animal that you can interact with and see moving around the tank during the day, this isn't the one for you. But if you're at school or at work during the day and you want something you can interact with at night, then a Crested Gecko is pretty awesome for that. Number 9, if you have a female Crested Gecko, there's a chance they may lay eggs. Now, the really cool thing about this is though it's really rare, there have been a few occasions when they have actually produced clones of themselves. Now, for the most part, I don't think those clones last very long, unfortunately. I think there's been a few cases where they've actually grown into adulthood, but a lot of them don't live very long. This isn't something you're likely to come across. If you do, that's awesome. But you may likely, if you have a female, find eggs in her tank or find her buried deep down in the substrate laying eggs. To me, like for Lyra, in her case, I only noticed this August, September time. But when I was clearing out her old tank, there was a lot of old eggs in there. Nothing really you need to do. They'll just dehydrate, it's fine. And number 10, tank size. So a really interesting thing that's happened in, I think, the past year is the debate over the minimum size for a Crested Gecko tank, which for the longest time has been 45 by 45 by 60 centimeters tall. Now Lyra lives in a 60 by 45 by 60 tank, and to be honest with you, if I gave her a 90 centimeter tall tank, she would use all that space as well. So what I would say, what I'd suggest is If 45 by 45 by 60 is all you have at the moment, maybe you have a baby or juvenile, that's going to be fine. But I would really encourage that in the future, if you feel like you'll have enough space, or you already have enough space for a bigger tank, go for it. Because one cool thing about these guys is in the evening when they are awake, they are using all of that space, and there's nothing more than we want to see than our animals thriving and just having a really cool environment to live in. So I guess number 10 is they will use all the space you give them, so don't be afraid to go too big because they will absolutely love it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. As I said, I will go through each of my other animals and do a similar thing. If you haven't already, please subscribe, but thank you for watching and goodbye.